Welcome to Global Tax Talks Tax in 60 Seconds. I'm Will Morris. The past few days have been head-spinning. Just over a week ago, President Trump announced 50% tariffs on Europe starting June 1, causing market uncertainty and tax uncertainty regarding the US-EU Pillar 2 deal. However, 2 days later, these tariffs were suspended until July the 9th. Further trade talks are now scheduled, but now, in one final truly startling plot twist just before we filmed, the US Court of International Trade invalidated many of the Liberation Day tariffs. I'll come back to this. But focusing in on tax, the US and the EU and the OECD continue to talk about Pillar 2. And given questions I've received from several parts of the world, I wanted to quickly cover what I understand to be the main elements of the US ask on this. First, and as discussed many times before, the US does not want the UTPR to apply to US domestic income when the US is a parent company. That's straightforward, and there appears to be widespread understanding that this has to change. Second, the US appears to have settled on the idea of the US's minimum tax, GILTI, coexisting with Pillar 2. The argument here is, in the context of the very detailed and sometimes onerous US corporate tax rules, US businesses and their subs do not need to be subject to two regimes. Therefore, the UTPR should also not apply at the level of foreign subs of US parents. An important consequence of this is that US groups would not be subject to Globe Information or GIR requirements, as they would not then be within Pillar 2 at all. However, in a potential wrinkle, under several countries' legislations, it would be hard to apply this retroactively. Third, although this is slightly less clear, something needs to be done about the Qualified Domestic Minimum Top-Up Tax, or QDMTT. That may relate to allowing GILTI to take priority over QDMTTs in some cases, so that less top-up tax would be owing, or it may relate to reporting under QDMTTs. Some countries in Scandinavia, for example, have said they will require GIR reporting for purposes of the QDMTT. Presumably the US would view that as a backdoor into full GIR reporting. But remember, tax isn't driving the bus. So let's go back to trade and the US Trade Court decision, even though it'll be appealed. How does the ball bounce from here? Does the EU and the UK feel empowered by this to give less in trade talks? Does the US then feel the need to press more forcefully in the tax area? The EU was never going to repeal its VAT and was unlikely to change its digital laws. But now, what about UTPRs and DSTs? Does this make the Section 899 retaliatory legislation even more likely? This really is an unparalleled situation with massive uncertainty. And remember, the US has other ways to move forward with other types of tariffs. Anyway, we'll cover this week by week to try to give some sense of direction. So thanks for joining me, and please come back next week so that you stay global tax ready.